Greetings, everyone out there in virtual land. I would like to welcome you to Mach Three's installment of my masterclass, Advancing Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Higher Education. So you're in for a treat today. We have several scholars, and we have our quintessential scholar who we are in many ways honoring, Dr. Melvin C. Terrell, for the mentoring that he's done over the years with so many of us. But at the core of today's discussion is a focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And with that said, the organizing body for this, one of the organizing bodies is the Mach 3 Center here at Prairie View A&M University. Mach 3 stands for Minority, Achievement, Creativity, and High Ability. And the center here at Prairie View, what we try to do is serve as a galvanizing space to bring events, to bring a focus on research, particularly research that focuses on populations of color, particularly Black populations in the HBCU context. So with that said, I want to turn it over to our great moderator today, Dr. Dawn Person. She's professor at Cal State University, Fullerton. She also serves as the director of the Center for Research on Educational Access and Leadership. So with that said, I'm going to kick it over to my good friend and colleague, Dr. Dawn Person.
Thank you, Dr. Bonner. It is a pleasure for me to serve as moderator today as we honor Dr. Terrell and we spend time together as colleagues and with the illustrious leaders in our field to talk about the role and the commitment that Melvin and those of you on this panel as well have been engaged in and involved in relative to mentoring. And we will speak about that within the context of equity, diversity, and inclusion. There are 4 areas that we will cover during our seminar today, our webinar, I'm sorry. We want to talk, Melvin, first of all, about the MCT Foundation, which you serve as lead on and had the vision to create. And at the core of it is the idea of mentoring. From that, then we'd like to spend some time talking about just what is mentoring and networking and the importance of it and the effectiveness of mentoring in serving as an action verb, if you will. That when we talk about mentoring, it is not a passive approach at all, but it's a very active approach where experts engage in a relationship around advising, consulting, supporting, and encouraging those that they work with who are moving through the ranks of higher education and other related fields. Then we hope to have some time where we can look at the book that was written about your life, Melvin, that Dr. Jackson took the lead on a while back that spoke to the ways in which mentoring has played a role in your life and those around you and the impact that your career has had on so many in developing our profession, especially in the area of diversity and equity and inclusion. So we want to examine your life, if you will, Melvin, as a mentor, to look at the ways in which you've coached and supported so many of us represented on this panel and out there in the field of higher education. So it's with great excitement, and I am very honored to serve as the moderator for this panel. And we will begin, if you all are ready, by having each of our panelists introduce themselves. And we'll start with our mentor of honor this morning, Dr. Terrell.
Thank you. My name is Melvin C. Terrell, and I am the chair of the Dr. Melvin C. Terrell Educational Foundation, Inc. I'm also the vice president emeritus and professor of education at Northeastern Illinois University.
Thank you. Dr. Jackson?
Hello, everyone. My name is Orlando Jackson, Vilas Distinguished Professor of Higher Education, Chair of the Department of Education Leadership and Policy Analysis, and also serve as Director of Wisconsin's Equity Inclusion Laboratory at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Dooley.
Hi, good morning. Elizabeth Dooley, currently professor in the College of Community Innovation and Education, and former provost and vice president for academic affairs at the University of Central Florida, spent 24 years of my life at West Virginia University before coming to Florida. And I've known Melvin for about 31, 32 years. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Michelle Morrow.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm Michelle Morrow, and I serve as Director of Scholarships in the Office of Financial Aid Scholarships and Student Employment at Northeastern Illinois University in Chicago. And I also serve in the role as National President for the Association of Black Women in Higher Education.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Dr. Bonner if he would mind just elaborating a little bit more on the various roles that he is engaged and involved with at his institution.
Sure, my good friend. Thank you. My name is Fred Bonner. I am a professor, endowed chair, and chief research scientist here at Prairie View A&M University for the Mach 3 Center. And again, that stands for Minority Achievement, Creativity, and High Ability Center. And I've been here at Prairie View now for, well, this is going on 6 years. Prior to that, I was the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Endowed Chair at Rutgers University. And prior to that, professor at Texas A&M University. So glad to be back here and really excited. And I just want to say that my connections with Dr. Terrell go all the way back to 1997 when I was a newly minted doctor. And I was associated with the American Association of Blacks in Higher Education. And I actually won the Dissertation of the Year award. And after my presentation, I remember this gentleman coming in with this really nice suit on, walking to the front and said, "Young man, you're gonna go somewhere and I'm gonna mentor you." I said, "All right, good doc." Well, and we've been connected ever since. So that's been since 1997. So appreciated the mentoring and guidance that I've gotten from Dr. Terrell.
Very good, thank you. And I have been involved in higher education myself for over 40 years. And Melvin was one of the first folks that I met at an American College Personnel Association conference. And similar to you, Fred, he said to me, "I think we need to do some work together." And over the years, he has consistently kept me involved and engaged in work that he was doing, whether it was writing or thinking through ideas or concepts, and encouraging me and promoting me within the profession. So it is my pleasure to serve as your moderator today and to participate in this very important topic of mentoring in higher education, and having Melvin serve as a role model for all of us and how it's done and done effectively. So before we get started with talking about mentoring specifically, Dr. Terrell, would you please share a bit about the Melvin C. Terrell Foundation? Talk to us a little bit about how this came about, what your vision and what the mission is of that foundation.
Thank you, Dr. Person. Okay. The Dr. Melvin C. Terrell Educational Foundation was reconstituted in 2018. We were at a retreat. The foundation has a board of directors made up of outstanding faculty, administrators, and corporate leaders. They met and they renamed the foundation in my name, which I was very privileged to find that they believe that my vision of higher education, particularly for minority graduate students. The vision of the foundation is to increase and diversify graduate students, particularly minority students, in the area of the following: dealing with diversity, dealing with increasing the numbers, and also securing grants and foundation for our graduate students. First, let's talk about the scholarships. We are raising monies from donors that believe in the importance of diversifying our graduate students in the area of higher education and student affairs. Out of that funds, we are able to generate several scholarships each year for deserving students. We contact the various faculty members in higher education programs that deals with diversity and student affairs. In addition, We want to be the pace setters for helping our graduate students to be successful. As you know, many of our minority students are dealing with several issues. One would be they're struggling financially. They are in immense amount of stress. They're concerned about their health and safety, particularly during this pandemic. So what we hope to do is to consult with other foundations in corporate America to identify grants to submit and encourage and improve our graduate students. Lastly, we want to create the best holistic possible experience for our minority graduate students. And lastly, we do want to provide mentoring and professional development, and that will come from the grants that I mentioned earlier, dealing with the areas of concern of our minority students. And we're talking about Black, Latino, X, and other underrepresented students.
So Melvin, there are a few of us that serve on your board, so I would like to ask if any of the board members would want to just offer their perspective on the foundation and your involvement and engagement. Dr. Dooley?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I know there was a section later on, but I will jump in terms of the mentoring. I believe that working with the foundation and others, we realize that it's critical that the mentorship and the guidance that has been provided by Dr. Terrell, that continues. So not only is it guiding the graduate students at this time, but it's also creating a culture or an environment by which or through which they will be able to impact what's happening on campuses across the country. And so really it's a lifetime initiative that looks for institutionalization of best practices that then advance our students who matriculate through our leadership programs, as well as being inducted into their first positions in leadership.
Dr. Bonner, would you like to comment about being involved with the foundation?
Yes, one of the contemporary discussions about diversity, equity, and inclusion is that we miss the fourth base. So it's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And the one thing that I would say that the MCT Foundation has done and continues to do is to show, particularly for students of color, marginalized populations, that we actually belong in higher education. And Dr. Terrell, this foundation, through his efforts, through his work, and through the board, all of you make sure that students, particularly our vulnerable populations, know that they belong in higher education. And I think that has been a very, very important part and mission and vision of what this foundation has done.
Thank you. From my own experience, I found that the board really has illuminated the idea that mentoring matters and that we have to reach back, reach in, and as you said, engage our young people that are coming into the profession and going up through the ranks of the profession to recognize our history, our evolution, and to connect, giving them the idea that as they go forward to bring others with them. And I think that Dr. Terrell has done such an excellent job of, as an example of that, the importance of giving back as you go. So Melvin, I think you wanted to add more?
Yes, I did. I was going to say that our tagline for the foundation is transforming lives through diversity, research, and scholarship.
Wonderful. Absolutely. That's exactly what the wonderful board members that you have that span many different areas of higher education are engaged, actively engaged in all of those aspects. So thank you for that. We're thrilled to have such a foundation that really fits into a niche that's missing in the higher education professional world. And that is one that specifically focuses on mentoring, scholarship development, and support for underserved communities of graduate students in higher education. So let's begin our conversation now and dialogue a bit about this idea of mentoring. And I'd like to spend the next few minutes just talking about what do we mean by mentoring? Mentoring is an active verb, not as a passive approach at all. What do you all see as effective mentoring? And why is it so important for us as higher education leaders?
Hi, this is Gerlando Jackson here. I'll share a perspective from the sense that to me, mentoring is the sharing of information and guidance that helps demystify a pathway, whether that's a pathway to and through a graduate program or a career pathway. And just that sort of guided steps and paired opportunities to walk together through one's journey. That's the type of mentorship that is meaningful, is lifelong, and it tends to be the kind of mentorship where the mentor is equally, excited about these opportunities because they're going along for the ride with you. And that would be how I would think about mentoring in this context.
So if I can jump in addition to that, I would say that mentoring is value added. If you look at a starting point and you get to the middle point of your career or your being, what has the impact been? If it were not for mentoring, perhaps you would not have persisted in your graduate program. If it weren't for mentoring, perhaps you would not have been offered that first position in leadership. So I see it as being very holistic. There is a formality to it, which doesn't necessarily cross over into the psychosocial piece of mentoring that really is the most value added for African-American students, Latinx students. You have to go beyond the formality of paper and pencil. You have to move into a state of respect, a state of affirming, and a state of being, as you said, purposeful and as well as belonging.
And I would add that having a mentor is having someone who listens to you, someone who also is an advocate for you when you need one, also someone that will push you gently, sometimes a little harder to do things that you might not have thought that you were capable of doing. And I would say that's something that I call him Dr. T, has done. A lot of the opportunities, I think of the things that I have done in my career and leadership roles I've stepped into in different organizations. I might not have thought of doing it had I not gotten that nudge to do it. And so that's what I think a mentor does. And that's what I like to do now in terms of playing it forward. When I see someone who has the potential to do something else, I try and encourage them to think about that. And so that's what I think is an important parts or aspects of mentoring.
I also want to say that the mentor helps the mentee looks at options, consequences, and solutions. And also what you all are saying is that the relationship must be comfortable and grounded in connectedness. Like if you're in higher education, let's use myself as an example. One of the things that I tried to do was to encourage my mentees was to write and to publish and to research. And we collaborated, many of us, on a number of articles, journals, and books, particularly with Dr. Jackson and with Dr. Person. So we work to help each other out. That's one of the reasons why they say that I'm a scholar practitioner, because not only did I want to be administrator, but also I wanted to be a scholar, putting out information that was current and that would help our professionals to improve in their lives, particularly in their professional lives.
Anyone else want to comment before we move on? So just picking up on what you just said, Melvin, I think that mentoring, and I think others have said this as well, mentoring has had an impact on all of us sitting on this panel today. And I'd like for you all to share, if you will, just a few examples of the impact that mentoring has had on you.
Well, I think I'll start off. Since I was the vice president for student affairs at Northeastern Illinois University for almost like 22 years, the presidents of the university, I worked with 3 college presidents, and 2 of them was very instrumental in my development. And what I mean by that, they allowed for me to take an administrative leave for 6 months to finalize some of the journals, particularly the NASAP journal that I was the editor of. Dr. Jackson was able to be co-editor of one of those journals. In addition, they allowed me to do an ACE fellowship at the university, particularly Florida State University. So I spent a year learning about administration, athletic administration, and assessment in higher education. So my mentoring came from above, and these presidents allowed me to continue my work as a scholar and practitioner, and also as helping me to deal with my division, because I had probably about a $28 million budget, but I was able to hire very competent people, hired a diverse staff. Michelle is one of those hires. And through national searches, we were able to find competent minority candidates for a number of positions that I was able to do searches for.
And Dr. Don, I just wanted to say that mentoring is about finding that right fit. And many times, and Dr. Terrell is a great example of this, and I believe in the importance of having multiple mentors, because very rarely do you get everything that you need in one person. But then every once in a while, you run across that rare person like Dr. Terrell, who has embodied all of those archetypes. So, there are several different models out there, different archetypes. My little fly-by-night set of archetypes is there's the mentor that I call the connector. There's the connector. That person is the hookup person. I can remember my very first opportunity to write, to publish, my very first journal article, my very first connection to a book publisher. That was Dr. Terrell. So he's definitely a connector. An illustrator. So he talked about being an ACE fellow. I was an ACE fellow. So he illustrated, he illuminated what I needed to do to chart a course and to be a higher ed professional. So he's connector, he's illustrator. And also the third archetype that I have is a sounding board. And I can tell you there are times when navigating this higher ed space, being a Black male in post-secondary education is tough. But to see a role model who has gone through, who has been successful, to share with me, there might be some dark days, but this is how you need to think about this. Or did you think about this? Or what about this perspective? So Dr. Terrell has been connector, he's been illustrator, he's been sounding board. So, that's just a blessing to have so much just in one person.
So I want to jump in. So how has mentoring impacted me? I want to share when I was a faculty member, I believe I was the only African-American in the college at West Virginia University. And so you see when others are being mentored in terms of co-publishing, writing of grants, et cetera, and that wasn't my story. So that not being my story, there were prolific writers, African-American writers in the field. So I went to the national conference, and I can tell you, I saw the individual who I wanted to connect with. I stood at the bottom of the escalator. I saw him coming down the escalator into the main area of the conference center, and I approached him and indicated that I needed a mentor. And God bless him, because he agreed to serve as a mentor. And through that, we co-published, we edit a book. And the other thing in terms of connecting, it's advancing people, because you have to understand that the dominant culture, they put other folks' names on the table. This is someone you should consider. So it's critical that we're in the space, but when there's not a mentor available, give yourself permission to step out of your comfort zone. Believe me, I was not comfortable stepping out. But if that is what it was going to take for me to make it to the next level, I absolutely had to do it. And again, the mentorship, the input has just been incredible. So I would say the experience has been transformational, being a mentee, but as a mentor, also transformational, because those relationships are long-term. And the value that you get from the generation that's coming after us, my head cannot comprehend all this being done now. So I rely on those who have their hand on the pulse at this moment in time to educate me and help me. So it's a transformational experience, I think, for both the mentee and the mentor.
I'd like to raise up the notion of vision. From my perspective of many of the mentoring interactions I've had, is that mentors can help shape your vision for a career. And I think, at least for me, that's helpful because not understanding the full landscape and what type of opportunities are out there and the what actions open up what doors is hard to do without some guidance. And one of the key aspects, at least for me, has been a mentor helping to shape your vision with and having a larger understanding of the landscape of opportunities so that you can meter your steps in such a way that you can obtain those over time and in due time.
I think Dr. Dooley said something that is really important. She spoke about approaching who she wanted to be her mentor, and sometimes that's hard. And I think back to being an undergrad and how it was hard to ask for help because you think you're supposed to be able to do it on your own. And a lot of times we find that as a professional, I found that being the case with our students, that it's hard to ask for help and for guidance and for mentorship because you feel you have to do it on your own. And so I think that's really important for us to come to terms with that and know that we might need some guidance, and that it's good to take that step and to approach that person, to see that person who's doing something that you wish to do, such as Dr. Dooley mentioned, wanting to produce publications. It's okay to approach that person who you see is doing what you want to do, and because they're the ones who can help guide you. And so that's why I kind of not as hard on students when I hear students being afraid to ask for help, because I understand that place. Because sometimes we think, you know, as Black people sometimes, that we're supposed to be able to do this on our own, and it's not weakness to ask for help. It's actually strength.
That's such a powerful statement you just made. We know from the research that oftentimes folks of color are afraid to ask for help. They think they're supposed to already know how to do these things. If you've gone through a master's program, you're supposed to know these things. If you've gone through a doctoral program, you're supposed to know. And I love the fact that even though in my younger years, I certainly had a lot of energy and I thought I knew a lot. And it was those mentors who were able to tap me on the shoulder and say, oh, slow down a little bit now. You can't change the world in a year. You know, you're not going to change higher education in a year. And you got to pay attention to the political fallout of what it is that you're trying to do. I grew up in higher education working in minority affairs, it was called at that time, but what we would call our equity and diversity world. And for those of you all who have been connected, and I think all of us on this panel have in some way or another, you know that there's all kinds of political aspects to doing that kind of work, working in cultural centers and so forth. And the most powerful and influential mentoring that I received were those mentors like Melvin, who would say to me, you know, you might want to think about what that's going to mean, not just in the immediate moment, but what is it going to mean in the long term for your career and for those students that you're trying to serve and support. And I appreciated that. To me, that's probably one of the most powerful aspects of mentoring that has occurred for me, is to have that person who walked a few steps ahead of me that had wise advice that they could offer to me about actions and behaviors that I might be engaged in that would not necessarily benefit me or benefit the students that I was working with in the long term. So that for me, that's been a very powerful piece. And I think another part that impacted my career was when I changed careers and went from being a practitioner to teaching full time and not knowing the world, the faculty world at all, having faculty mentors. Again, Melvin helped me in that arena to think about that transition step and what I needed to do and how I needed to shift my mindset and perspective as I joined the academic ranks as a faculty member. So we've talked about in this short session here, the idea of visioning and the mentor helping to shape your vision. You all mentioned stepping out of your comfort zone and approaching a person and asking for them to help you and to coach you along the way and to support you. You talked about the importance of having someone who promotes you, who sees opportunities and makes the door, opens the door to create some opportunities for you. And then this idea of the importance of asking for help. And one of the nice things about Melvin is he didn't wait for people to ask for help. When he saw that he could step in and make a difference in your life, sometimes when we didn't even realize that we needed somebody to make a difference, and he stepped in and filled that void. So Melvin has been identified as an outstanding mentor. He's received awards and accolades from NASPA, the National Association of Student Personnel Administrators. He's received awards from a number of other associations about his effective mentorship. And I'll let him fill in some of the gaps of who those other organizations have been. But throughout his career, he has been recognized as a person who was willing and able and effective at mentoring others. And that's an important point, because we got people out there who want to mentor, but may not be as effective at doing it and helping to move people to achieve their goals. And I'd just like for you to share a little bit, and I know, Gerlando, you wrote about the impact that Melvin has had, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But I'd like for you all to share a little bit about your valuing of mentoring and the investments that you've made in mentoring others. So Melvin has been kind of our role model in that, but you all also on this panel have been mentoring as well. So share some of the value that you see in mentoring others. You mentioned that a little bit, but if you could talk a little bit more about that. As a mentor, what do you get out of mentoring others?
You get to take the journey with your mentees. And, what's very exciting about that is, you can see the conceptualization of the idea of where they want to go and have the opportunity to walk along that journey with them, help them through the good times, the great times, and the bad times, and be there for them in such a critical way that you feel the success and you feel the concern too when they run into challenges. And the key for them is they know that they're never alone as they venture out into new opportunities. So it's certainly, I think, a very critical role that we have to play, because too often there's a few available to do the work, and those few we have to create a larger network. We got to create a larger network of mentors to do more of this work and see the value in it.
And if I can add to that, when I left Northeastern and went to West Virginia University, I wanted to have in my workload the ability, the capacity, and the resources to recruit African-American students in the teacher education programs. So upon recruiting students, there has to be a formal mentorship aspect about that. But not only that, I had to advocate for financial resources, tuition waivers, and scholarships to support these students. and realizing that I was bringing students from cities, metropolitan urban areas from across the United States to West Virginia, I knew that they couldn't travel that journey alone, if you will. And not being able to do that, I had to move it. Again, I mentioned the psychosocial aspect. I had to move into that zone. I also had to move into the zone of talking about racism and prejudices, et cetera, racist ideas, et cetera. So I would always say that I became the surrogate parent of about 100 students who I had recruited into West Virginia University. And to cite an example, I had to be available 24/7. One evening, my students were racially profiled. Driving downtown, Morgantown, West Virginia, stopped by the police. Police draws a gun on the passenger side where one of the African-American male students was sitting. I get a call at 10 o'clock at night. I'm available. The next day, we're sitting in an attorney's office. The day after that, we're confronting the city of Morgantown police. So it goes beyond that. It's an investment. And for me, it was accepting a social responsibility to be available to the students that I brought to an environment that may not have been conducive or supportive for those students. And so you move beyond, again, the paper and pencil task, and you cross a line into making sure that you're an advocate, keeping those students safe, and making sure they're unharmed. And in that situation, those students were able to continue and feel confident about themselves while having that experience in the back of their minds. Long story short, they reached a settlement. But it's those kind of things that move beyond the boundaries of the academy, because the environment can also impact and halt a student's progress. So I just wanted to share that in terms of the value and mentor inside and outside.
So mentoring 24/7.
24/7.
I think that in my life, some colleagues have said that mentoring to me is a ministry. And what has happened is when I was a young man attending my first NASPA conference, my colleagues, it was called the Minority Network back then, they were talking about who was going to write about our minority students and retention. I was only 27 years old, and I thought to myself when I got back home, I said, I can start doing that. So my first monograph, it was called back then, was called From Survival to Success, Promoting Minority Student Retention. And that was co-edited by Dr. Doris Wright Carroll, who was at Kansas State University. And from there, as I went to conferences and met young professionals that had heard about my writing, my dissertation, they said, Dr. Terrell, can you help me? So I selected a number of colleagues over the years to help them with their research and scholarship, particularly those that were on the professorial rank and moving from, instructor assistant on to full professorship. So I felt that it was a ministry for me to try to help these individuals look at options, consequences, and solutions to the publishing world.
Any other comments on that topic of the value of investing in others and mentoring? So the MCT Foundation has mentoring as a key component of its mission. Why is that the case? Why do you all believe or see mentoring as being critical to advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion in higher education?
Well, these are our future leaders. With our niche dealing with higher education, student affairs, minority graduate students, we want them to be tomorrow's leaders. And we want to have some developmental steps that they'll be able to move and finish their degrees and move into doctoral programs and on to their professional career.
And I
Others?
would just say that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. I would just say that the mentoring is really important to get the guidance from those who have gone before us and who truly have the wisdom, the knowledge, the experience to give us some insight on the true things that we need to think about by way of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there is a very, very contemporary focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging that we must take into account, you know, whether it's dealing with issues of race, racism, dealing with George Floyd. I mean, but you can go all the way back to, you know, there are folks in our purview, some of our mentors, they can talk very vividly about issues that went along during the civil rights movement. So it's important to be able to juxtapose George Floyd with Emmett Till. And I think that these mentors who have been there, done that, who have the history, who have the knowledge, we stand on their shoulders. And I think we have a better and a more informed approach to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We not only value the contemporary, but we know where we came from. And I think some of those mentors give us that memory, that diversity, institutional memory, you know, that we really need to have. Because I mean, we have so many folks that don't understand, you know, well, what does it mean in a very contemporary context to understand what it means to be a man of color from this man who's been through these different generational cycles. So I think the whole mentoring experience is not just about a transactional relationship where I'm telling you what to do, but it's about what the MC Terrell Foundation is about, transformational. So, you know, you have to look at what are you doing to transform that person. You're not just transacting business, but you're actually engaging with them to understand how can I benefit you just like you benefit me. In essence, how can we transform how we think about issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? And I think that that comes with contemporary, but it also comes with sage wisdom.
And can I add to that? I absolutely agree. It's, to me, it's that readiness mode. You can get into these environments and you can crash and burn. You may not recognize what micro and macro aggressions look like. So it's almost like if you've been in the academy and you've seen those things, why would we permit someone else to have the same type of experiences with them not having any knowledge? So to me, it's the readiness. And you know, as an example, when I was vice provost at UCF before I was provost, I went to a meeting with African-American faculty and Hispanic faculty. And I said, how many of you are, by show of hands, are thriving and how many are just surviving? There was one person who was thriving. So again, when you have that visual image, that means there's a call to action on my part or on our part when we realize that they're not fulfilling the vision that has been instilled in them because of the role models or because of the people who have mentored them and they're not having the same experiences. So just wanted to add that caveat.
And the mentoring is key in order for us to survive and to have colleagues who are able to progress, but we also need to be concerned about those coming up behind us. And being able to secure places for them to have. I think about that often, you know, as folks leave and retire, you know, when we're at these institutions and they're not being replaced by folks who look like us. And so that really tells us that we need to do what we need to do in terms of mentoring those who are able to take on those positions. And what we need to do to raise our voice is to challenge that as well too. So that's why it's really important to look at those mentors and those who came before us who were able to do that. That's one of the reasons why we're in the positions that we are in now. So we have to continually do that. There is no relaxing. We have not overcome. We have to keep on working to achieve that. So I really relate to that, especially what you said, Dr. Julie, in terms of, you know, just asking that question. Sometimes we have to ask that question of our colleagues, especially now. We've gone through a lot in just a year, and things have been amplified that we may not have been talking about as openly, that we should continue this conversation just to make sure we're not just surviving, but in some way thriving.
One of the things that I appreciate about so much of what you all said so far is that mentoring supports the evolution of African Americans and other folks of color in higher education. That a good mentor and good mentoring promotes persistence and retention in the profession. And we have so many people who leave the profession after 5 years or 7 years. So the better and more effective our mentoring, the more likely it is that we are able to keep folks like us continuing and persisting. And having said that, I'm going to move us along to the next segment of our discussion today. There have been many. Does someone want to say something? I'm sorry. We good? Okay. There have been many examples of effective mentorship that you all have mentioned today, and that we've probably all read about or seen as examples in our own lives. And I think that we all in this panel would agree, and those listening in the audience that know Melvin, that he is indeed an exemplar of effective mentorship. So much so that Dr. Jackson and others wrote a book about his life and his experience as a mentor. And I'm just going to ask you, Dr. Jackson, if you would take a few moments and just share with us some key points about Melvin as a mentor, as was presented in the book, Advancing Equity in Student Affairs, that you facilitated.
Sure. The book did two items. It one showed how his mentoring was transformative to the field, but secondarily, it also showed how he was a key change agent in the diversification of the student affairs profession. And what is remarkable about this particular historic figure is that he broke the mold. He broke the mold in such a way. We're talking about mentoring, but really his approach is very different than traditional mentoring. Most people have already said he sought you out. He saw in you a person that could accelerate from where you were to somewhere else. And he came to you and talked to you about how he would be of assistance. And I can remember a story very similar to the one Dr. Bonner mentioned. And quite frankly, I remember after he called me the first time, I was like, yeah, right. Yeah, and he was true to his word. He followed up, didn't know me, had not met me in person or anything, and he had committed to taking this journey with me, and he stood by those commitments. So he reaches out to you. The other part I'll share and let others talk about how special he is. But the other aspect is that he's a tremendous sponsor, right? That we all know that to get into certain spaces and then to get certain opportunities, someone has to be in the room arguing on your behalf. And the great thing about him was either he was in the room or he knew people in the room who could get their advocacy in place for you. And I think those are kind of two tremendous aspects I'll highlight and allow others to talk about how special he is.
Thank
Let me
you.
just continue. What Dr. Jackson didn't mention was, let's see, in about 2007, I was at the NASPA conference, and Dr. Jackson said, Dr. Terrell, why don't you sit down for a moment? You always, talking, running around, attending the session. He said, I want to talk with you. He said, when you retire, I'm going to write a book about your career. And so in my retirement speech in December of 2008, I was able to retire at 59 years old. In that retirement speech, I said that one of my mentees, Dr. Jolanda Jackson at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, is planning to write a book about my career. And lo and behold, it happened. And I am so grateful to him and the other authors in the book that illustrated my career as it related to diversity and inclusion and equity.
Dr. Terrell, you say that you've retired, but we know that retirement is relative. That even in your retirement, you have continued to mentor, to coach, to support, to engage, and to promote all of those things that we've been talking about today. So we thank you for that. And we appreciate the ways in which you've been a good mentor, coach, and supporter to us and to others. And I'd just like to ask the panelists if there are firsthand experiences that you'd like to add to the key points that Dr. Jackson just raised in terms of how Dr. Terrell, either personally for you or how you've seen him do it with others beyond what we've said already today. Any firsthand experience have you seen with him coaching, supporting, mentoring, and advising others?
So I'll always remember my very, very first international trip was with academic professional trip was with Dr. Terrell to Warsaw, Poland, of all places. So he was being recognized there and at Warsaw University. And he was like, well, hey, Bonner, come along. He said, we're gonna get there. I'm gonna do some things. And we got there. He really kind of pushed me out there. It's like, well, you go, you speak, you talk, you make those connections. He said, I'm gonna do my thing, but you're the scholar, you're the budding scholar, you need these experiences. So get out there, talk, let them know what we do, by way of student affairs, higher ed, and kind of give them a perspective, that cross comparative international perspective. So I just always appreciated having that experience with him and really getting connected very early on. And again, that goes to my archetype, the connector. So having now made a lot of international trips, but I just always go back to that very, 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 very first trip. It reminds me of one of our Sade's famous songs, nothing as good as it the first time. So that very first trip, I will always remember.
Nice. Thank you.
Well, I will say, Dr. Terrell, connecting and encouraging me to be part of professional organizations. I can think of the Illinois Committee on Black Concerns in Higher Ed is another, and also NASAP, when Dr. Terrell used to chair the Black Greek Lettered Organization Summits, and myself and colleagues being asked to serve on the steering committee. So that was probably that was the first experience of coordinating a national conference and also chairing a conference for Illinois Committee on Black Concerns in Higher Ed. Although that's a kind of a funny story how I found out I was going to co-chair that. I found out from someone else, they said, oh, congratulations, we hear you're going to be co-chairing next conference. We were walking down the hall, I'll never forget. I said, wait, what did you just say? You're co-chairing the conference. I said, really? Like, go on to the meeting, I'll meet you back, and double back to Dr. Terrell's office. So I hear that I'll be co-chairing. Is that true? Oh, yeah. You know how Dr. Terrell does that laugh. And so, it had very short time to put it together, but we did it. He said, I knew you could do it. But, that's that pushing you out there to do something that you never thought that you could do, but you can do it. So
hey, Dr. Morrow, with Dr. Terrell, we were voluntold quite a few times.
Yes. always. And you're when he needs you and he reaches out, it's the same, even in his retirement days, to So, helping to be on the committee for the birthday party, that's another assignment. But I just continue to do it. That's my role as the mentee. So just to think of those are good memories, and we learn some of those things that we do with our mentees as well too. So it's a good experience, and I'm appreciative of having those experiences and carrying them with me in what I do and how I engage and serve others too.
Dr. Morrow, and you're saying that reminds me of the phone call I received a couple of years ago from Dr. Terrell, as if we had just gotten off the phone the day before, which we had not. But his voice, the way he approached me was like, we had just talked yesterday. And he said, I have something I need you to do that I'd like you to participate in because you bring, and he listed out all of this expertise. So, he builds you up, right? And then he comes in with the request. Right. Which by the time he gets to that request, you're automatically going to say yes. Because he
what else you got to say?
All these reasons for why there's no way you could not say yes. And yes. What I've appreciated about Dr. Terrell over the years is that each time that he's called on me to help with something, it's always been something that made me better as a professional, made me better as a colleague, made me better as a scholar. And so it's been just a pleasure for me to serve with him these last, year or so. It's been with the MCT Foundation. And he asked me to help him with the grant writing committee. And so I've been involved with that. And our 6 a.m. meetings every 8 weeks, I'm in California time, so 6 a.m. for me. But I don't ever regret having said yes to that opportunity. And it's because I know that all of the work that we are doing will pay off and that it will flourish in the future generations of scholars and student affairs professionals will benefit from that work. So I appreciate the fact that you talked about Dr. Bonner, about him being able to do the connecting, right? To get you connected. And I see him as someone who really sees potential, and he's almost like a person who's very good at putting puzzles together, that he sees where the pieces fit and all of the folks that make up the menagerie of mentees and support people that he has in his life. And I think that's a masterful skill set to have. And I don't think that he's rarely wrong when he comes to a person and says, I need you, and I think you would be good at doing X. And it's always to that person's benefit as well as benefiting the community at large. And to me, that's an example of why mentoring should be tied to diversity and inclusion. And it's so critical because you're gaining skill sets along the way, but you're also contributing and giving back to the community. And I think Dr. Terrell has been a great example of that in all of our lives. Any other stories we want to tell, Dr. Dooley?
I don't have a story, but what I will say, because I left Illinois in '91, I believe, going to West Virginia. What I will say though is Dr. Terrell is a person who always serves as a resource in terms of calling on someone to review promotion and tenure packets, calling on a person to ask if they know someone in this aspect of the academy. Not only is he a resource, but he connects you to people. So he doesn't leave you hanging. And he will follow up, by the way. One thing about Dr. Terrell, he won't let anything go stale. So everybody stay fresh if you're connected with Dr. Terrell. Absolutely. Thank you.
Any other comments at this point? Okay, I'm going to move us along to our final part of the questions that we have for our panelists. And we do have a few questions from our audience that I want to make sure we make time for. So I think you've spoken to most of us have talked about in our comments so far, kind of how mentoring has impacted our career trajectory. But I want to give you a chance if there's anything else that you want to add about that notion of how effective mentoring has affected your career trajectory. Does anyone want to add anything that they've not said so far?
So Dr. Terrell, he's also very connected to another one of my mentors, Dr. Mary Howard Hamilton. And I can remember having very similar conversations with both of them. And this conversation today has reminded me that I've been saying that I was going to write it up as an op-ed piece, so I need to do it. So it's what I call the opaque glass. And I can remember having this conversation with Mary Howard Hamilton and Dr. Terrell, kind of in different ways, but it was the very same conversation. So this is when I was thinking about what I needed to do to go for full professor. And so many people said, oh, well, you got associate, you got tenure. Why would you even want to do that? I mean, it's not that much more money. I mean, you're not going to be doing anything different. What's the benefit? You're going to spend all that time, why? And I can remember Dr. Mary and Dr. Terrell saying, you know what? It's kind of like, have you ever been in a building, or have you ever been in a enclave where they have like this opaque glass or this frosted glass, and you see these bodies that are moving? You don't know what they're doing, but you see them moving. It's a lot of movement, but you can't truly see a clear picture. And they both said to me, going up for full professor, it allows you in that room to see what's really truly going on. So now you just see life in shadows. And for so many Black males, and for so many people of colors, for so many diverse populations, that last rung, that last ring, folks will tell you, well, that's not that important. It's okay, just, remain an associate. You don't have to worry about that. But both of them told me in different ways, yeah, you do need to worry about it, because you need to be in that room. You don't need to be wondering about what's going on. And for me, that's what a good mentor does. The good mentor tells you that, no, don't be satisfied with looking at life in shadows behind that opaque glass. You get in the room and participate, and then you see the reality of what's going on, not standing on the outside of the door. And I think that mentoring and Dr. Terrell and my mentors have done exactly that. They have encouraged me to do what I need to do to get in the room.
Can I add to that? I think that's really a critical point, because again, if it wasn't for the mentor that I had, I certainly would not have had the publications that I needed. But I think it's critically important to realize that, even becoming a professor is a pathway to executive leadership, because most often when you want to move on, to say have a credentials at professor level. So again, it's one of those exclusionary practices. If you don't have it, then you can't access it. And so I think we should be mindful and really make sure that as we serve as mentors, we talk to our students about what's the next opportunity and what the hidden expectations are. Because again, there are knowns and there are unknowns. There's a hidden curriculum and there are hidden expectations, and everyone may or may not have access to what that information is. I think it's very critical.
Also, I was going to mention that when I was director of the Multicultural Education Center at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, they were doing a national search for a VP for student affairs at Northeastern Illinois University. And most of my colleagues were saying that you're in minority affairs. How are you going to become a VP for student affairs? What happened with the search committee at Northeastern Illinois University and the college president, they realized that my skills and talent could be transferable to all students as it relates to retention of our students and enhancing the campus climate for our students. So I want to tell my colleagues that there are in diversity issues, don't feel like you're stuck. Your skills can be utilized in any other mainstream administrative post.
And if I can add to that, that's another lessons learned. Tell your story, how your skills are transferable.
When I when I finished my doctorate and I was in that crossroads, do I go into shoot for a vice presidency or go into teaching? The mentoring that I received and the coaching that I received from folks like Dr. Terrell and others was very, very helpful to me in helping me think about what that would mean and what the implications are. And I believe that if I had not had that mentoring and coaching, my career trajectory would be quite different than it is today. I don't think that I would have ever gone into teaching full time. I don't think I would have ever had the kind of impact that I've been able to have, not only in the classroom and preparing people to be future student affairs leaders, but also in research, in preparing what I like to say the next generation of socially just researchers who look at the evidence of data and the impact on folks of color in a very different way than our white counterparts have historically. And so I would have never had that opportunity or been able to venture in that direction. And then finally, I think the idea of being able to create opportunities for others in ways that I would have been able to do some of that in the field, I'm sure, but not nearly as much as I've been able to do on a global level, on a national level, and then regionally at the campus where I'm working at Cal State Fullerton. So for me, I think that mentoring and coaching has really definitely had a direct impact on my career trajectory. And I'm thankful and grateful to the Dr. Terrells who were willing to take that time to sit and have a conversation with me, to open my mind, to open my eyes, to see a broader world and a broader perspective that existed that I couldn't see. Kind of what you were saying, Dr. Bonner, that I could see things out there happening, but it didn't make sense to me. There wasn't real meaning for me in that. And so I found that the Dr. Terrells of the world helped me to make meaning of those shadows, if you will. Any other comments on the career trajectory piece? Okay. Well, I'm going to move us into our panelists into our final piece of our presentation this morning. So we have a few minutes for a couple of questions. The advice that people are wanting to hear about mentoring, and that is, how would you suggest new professionals find a mentor and what should they look for? Dr. Dooley's already told her story of how she asserted herself to find her mentor. Are there, is there advice that you can offer to some of the new professionals and mid-level professionals that may be listening to us today about how to go about finding a mentor and what they should look for?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I have a session that I've been conducting since my time at Texas A&M. I served as the Associate Dean of Faculties when I was there. So I found myself, after I got full professor, being named to this role as Associate Dean of Faculties. I moved from just having to be concerned about my own research agenda to now all of a sudden I'm on a campus where I have to be concerned about 3,000 full and part-time faculty and their research agenda. So I was like, oh boy, you got to come up with something to be able to get across this university and to speak to folks from vet med to philosophy to chemical engineering to ag and all points in between. So I developed this workshop that I've been doing over the years called Framing and Maintaining a Research Agenda. And part of framing and maintaining is a section that we do, a pretty robust session. We built it over the years just on mentoring. And one of the things that I share with folks is that, you know, for mentoring, I mean, it's a whole full-blown 2-hour session, but just a major piece of that I share is that we go about mentoring and looking for mentors the wrong way. One of the best models and best explanations of the whole mentoring process to me is if you go back to Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, I don't know if you remember, she has a section about mentoring, and I think it is one of the most powerful discussions about mentoring. And Sandberg says that we do mentoring the wrong way. She said, typically what we do, we go around, will you mentor me? 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 She said, we're like little birds, you know, looking for a worm. She's like, you don't do it that way. Basically, what you need to do is when you step to that person, you want to show them that, you know, by engaging in a mentoring relationship with you, you're going to, right off the bat, reduce the opportunity cost. Because I share when I'm talking to faculty, when I'm talking to my graduate students, those who are seeking a mentor, 9 times out of 10, do people want to mentor you? No. And is that because they're being mean or because they're nasty? No. They see mentoring as, mentoring you is going to mean that I got to take away some of my time of doing my thing. So what you want to do is to show them, I'm going to reduce the opportunity cost. And the first way to do that is to show them that I've at least done my homework. I know who you are. I know what you bring to the table. I know what your work looks like. I mean, I have an idea out there in the stratosphere who you are. But beyond knowing who you are, let me share with you who I am, and let me share with you the work that I have done that can either tie into what you're doing or amplify what you're doing, or in some way, it's that transformational thing. You're getting from me just as much as I'm getting from you in some ways. So I think that, what we try to do and what I try to do is to just share that if you're going to go out and seek a mentor, show the mentor what you bring to the table as well, and let them make the decision that they want to mentor you based on the fact that you're not just coming with your hand out, you're actually coming and bringing something to the table as well.
Thank you. I have a second question that I'll ask. I'm going to shoot through these last few questions with you all quickly. Thank you for that, Dr. Bonner. What about the race and gender of the mentor? Should one be sensitive to these issues in today's world, especially for our BIPOC colleagues? What's your reaction to that, panelists?
I've had a couple of, mentors who weren't Black. They're now retired, and, I was able to have good relationships with them. But I think if they're not Black, they definitely need to have an understanding and sensitivity. They need to be not only allies, but co-conspirators, so to speak. They need to definitely have an understanding, because that can create a barrier for you in the mentoring relationship if they do not have that sensitivity to what your walk has been in higher education. So you definitely need someone who understands that.
I agree. I think you have to be more than sensitive to it. I think that you can have several mentors at one time, quite frankly. I think there's so much value in having a mentor who has walked the walk with you or walked a similar walk that you're currently walking. So I would strongly advocate for someone looking like me in the instance where you need to tell the stories that are applicable and that will help them navigate this stressful and complex system. I think that's critically important. That doesn't negate having someone else.
Dr. Jackson, how many mentors should a person have?
My approach is one where I think of like having a board of advisors. And I was listening to that previous question, and I was actually hearing different things, because some people are best suited for coaching. They may not be your mentor, but you might need some coaching when you make it to certain stages. And in that stage, and trying to kind of unpack what's going on, the ability to have someone who may not have been your mentor to get you there, might not even look anything like you, but have spent a lot of time dealing with what you're now trying to understand, can take on the role of a coach, right? And I think a coach is a little different than a mentor. Like, they may not be as invested in your full journey. They just may be a thought partner in how you address this one particular matter. And the ability to have access to a pool of people who help you from a mentoring standpoint will be useful over time, and a sponsor. But at some points in times, you may just need some coaching on some critical decision making. And I just kind of think about my group along those three levels. And typically the mentorship piece does it does make a difference when they do share your experiences, as said earlier.
Thank you. Go ahead.
The earlier question in reference to where do you find mentors, you can find them at your state and annual conferences with your professional organization. That's why I encourage my colleagues to always go to these conferences, become active participants by presenting your work or a program. In addition, get involved with the leadership of the organization. That way you can meet people and develop these relationships, professional relationships. And then if you find somebody that you want to further discuss more than that in helping you with your career path, that is another way of identifying a person that can guide you and support you during your career path.
One of the questions from the audience was, what about now that we're in this COVID pandemic world, how do you find a mentor when everybody's kind of socially isolated at this time? Any advice do you all have to give to helping someone find a mentor during COVID?
You know, I working with a set of doctoral students who was asking that question. And what I suggested was, if they're reading the article, typically the article has the affiliation, email that person and just reach out and do similar to what Dr. Bonner mentioned, interest in the research. I'm working on this, where you're showing there's at least some synergy. So I think there's ways to do that now.
Any other suggestions?
And I don't think it's all that much of a difference, because for me, yeah, COVID, I mean, social distancing, I mean, our world has been flipped upside down. But when I truly think about mentoring, I have never, ever been on the same campus in the same space with any of my mentors. So prior to, I mean, technology, I mean, it's so easy now. But, you know, back in the day, Dr. Terrell and I had to get on the phone. I had to write him. We would have to do AOL, I mean, very slow. So, but we always managed to stay connected. So I would say, given social media now, exactly what Dr. Dooley mentioned, you know, finding those people, email those people, share with them what your research agenda is. You know what, be innovative. One of the things that I teach during that framing and maintaining session, we have to talk about our research agendas, and I have folks, it's like a half-day activity where they have to draw it, they have to write it, and they have to say it. And this is your elevator speech. So about your research agenda. So can you give me a schematic of your research agenda? So can you draw it? Can you say it? So from the 5th floor to the 1st floor, can you tell me who you are by way of your research agenda? So 5th floor going down to the 1st floor. So you can package up and tell me, you know, this is who I am, this is what I researched, this is what I'm publishing, blah, 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 finish it. So, you know, write it, draw it, say it. So I would say, do something like that in electronic format. You know, maybe share with that person who you want to mentor you. Here's a schematic. Here's the design of my research and how it all hangs together. You know, and here's like a little short abstract of, you know, this is what I'm doing, and maybe show them this is what you've done and this is how my work connects to yours. So all the stuff that you would do face to face, just think innovative and do those very same things virtually. I think we still do the same things.
One of the other questions that's come up from the audience is that many BIPOC faculty in academia and staff have to code switch. I find myself doing this as well. How do you protect yourself and have self-care for that? The code switching takes energy and effort. The person is asking, how do you protect yourself and how do you take care of yourself? Anyone want to take a stab at that question?
I'll stab. So the code switching, I think this is a faculty. They mentioned how do they protect themselves. I think what's important, yes, you may have to code switch, but you may need to get things in writing to protect you. So I'm kind of answering the question in terms of what this person may be pursuing in the faculty role, but at the same time, having those demands placed on them in terms of mentoring being one of them, being the spokesperson, all of those things, just making sure that you have things in writing. And in the code switching aspect, the double consciousness piece, to thine own self be true. Never become someone that you don't recognize in the mirror. And I think that's extremely, extremely important, because at the end of the day, it's your values that's going to hold you not only accountable to yourself, but what will keep you centered.
Thank you. We have just a few minutes left. I'm going to ask if there are any closing comments that any of you all would like to make in wrapping up our session, this webinar on mentoring as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and honoring our colleague, Dr. Terrell, and his effectiveness in being a mentor for so many.
Well, I just wanted to say that I'm humbled and honored beyond measure by this extraordinary moment for the past hour and a half. I appreciate the comments and the discussion that we had.
Any closing words of advice from any of our other panelists?
I'll just share in the chat. I love the question about the code switching. And I would almost say, do a little play on that. We all know what code switching is, and we all do it in different environments just to fit in. But I would say now, for me, the more contemporary thing is not to code switch, but to code stitch. Use that code and stitch it onto who you are into that environment. So you never lose who you are. So it's there, but it's stitched on to that environmental context, whatever it is. So I'm keeping who I am, but I'm stitching this code where I can like use it when I need it, but it doesn't supplant who I am. So trying to find those ways to incorporate and not, as colleagues said, not losing who you are. So instead of like feeling like you have to completely switch out of who you are, stitch who you are onto that environmental context and make it work for you.
Wonderful advice.
would-
Go ahead, Dr. Mark.
I would agree. I think it gets exhausting trying to be someone who you are not. At some point, you got to be confident in the space that you hold, and that you need to be who you are, and who you are is fine. And sometimes we have to give that grace to ourselves. And we also have to make sure others understand that, because others are looking at us to be role models. We don't always know that, but others are looking to us to do that so that they can be in the same position as well. So that we are all free to be who we are. And there's strength in that. And so I would say that to the person who asked that question as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to all of our panelists today. You all have made this an intriguing 90 minutes. We appreciate it. And I can speak on behalf of the audience. I'm sure that those viewing this have also enjoyed the time. I want to thank each of you. Thank you for being the mentors that you all are. We especially thank you, Dr. Terrell, because as we have heard over this time period, if it weren't for you, each of our lives would be stitched a little bit differently. So you have brought light, you've brought life, and you've encouraged us to be our best selves in so many ways. So we thank you for that. I'd like to also thank Dr. Bonner for hosting us today, and your team, Dr. Stella Smith, and who is the Associate Director of the Minority Achievement, Creativity, and High Ability Center, who helped to co-sponsor this event, along with diversity. And I'm sure I'm probably leaving someone else out. Dr. Terrell, did I get all of our sponsors? And of course, the MCT Foundation. Diverse Magazine, yes.
Fred, tell them the rest.
And I think, so I'll switch it back over to Fred, but I want to thank you all, and to the panelists. It's just wonderful to see us together as a community of Black professionals and faculty and staff being able to share in this important moment. I'll pass it back to Dr. Bonner for final comments.
Thank you, Dr. Person. And I just want to, again, say thank you to Dr. Terrell and to all these wonderful panelists. I love you all, such consummate scholars. Appreciate all the great comments. And I know Dr. Terrell appreciates you. And Mach 3, you always have a home here at Prairie View. So when the world opens back up, come and see us. And I also want to thank my trusty Associate Director, Dr. Stella Smith. She makes so much of this happen. And I also want to thank our tech support, Jeffrey Hampton. He always comes through for us. So Again, colleagues, appreciate y'all, love you all. So it's been a great day.
Very good. Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye.
Bye.